Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another Sphere Drones webinar. Today we'll be talking about introduction to drone security, but before we get on, I'm just going to wait another minute or so for a couple more people to join us before we kick off. So just bear with us another minute or so, and we'll be back with you shortly. Alrighty, so like I said, welcome to another Sphere Drones webinar. Today we'll be talking about introduction to drones with an organization called DroneSec. The CTO, Mike Monnik, will be joining us and be talking more about drone security. Now, as we usually do, for those of you that don't know, we run a few polls throughout our presentation. So what I'll do is I'll kick off our first presentation today. Our first webinar poll is, do you hold an RAPL, a remote pilot's license? Yes or no, just simple poll here. You get that answered, that'd be fantastic. Just a reminder, guys, throughout the webinar, please note that there's a questions tab on the right-hand side. And on the questions tab, please submit any questions that you may have or any questions, feedback, queries that you may have, and submit them on the right-hand side, and we'll get to them with the rest of the team. Fantastic. Just wait for a couple of people to vote on this poll. So, do you hold a remote pilot's license? All right, so without further ado, my name is Cockinos. I'm the CEO and founder of Sphere Drones, and today we're joined by Mike Monnik, the CTO, Chief Technology Officer at DroneSec. DroneSec is a consulting company that provides drone security, defense, and threat intelligence systems to their clients. And I welcome Mike. Hello, Mike. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing good, Paris. Thanks for having me on.
It's an exciting time we live in, and I hope everyone's safe and well, and everyone's families are safe and well as well. Without further ado, I'm actually going to pass over to Mike, but I will run through the agenda for today. So we're going to go through the introduction to DroneSec and Mike and his team. What is drone security? We'll discuss rogue and malicious drones, threat intelligence, counter drones, forensic, and the future. And then the back end of the webinar today, we're going to run a Q&A. Sphere Drones and our capabilities. So Sphere Drones is a diverse drone partner. We offer sales, repairs, maintenance, training, consulting, rentals, on-site support, and enterprise agreements. We work with consultants and service providers like DroneSec, and they're here to help your end-to-end drone requirements. Our current footprint in Australia, we're located in Sydney and in Perth, conveniently for the West Coast and the East Coast. And like I said, let me pass over to Mike and he can get going on the introduction to drone security. Over to you, Mike.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for that, Paris. And big thanks to the Sphere Drones team, obviously, as well, for having us on here today. So thanks to everyone for jumping on today, especially given the whole COVID situation. Personally, I know there's quite a few drone companies that are doing it pretty tough at the moment. So if that does include you, thanks for hopping on, and all the best for the next few kind of months as we get through this. But if we want to dive into the next slide, I'm going to give you a quick rundown as to what DroneSec really is, first of all. So I kind of hope you've grabbed a coffee and settled in. So my name is Mike. I'm the CTO, as Paris mentioned, and basically my background initially was a red team operator, or otherwise known as an ethical hacker, where I focused on things like uplifting incident response for the Commonwealth Games and rescuing organizations from big breaches and things like that. However, my foray into drones, came about 4 or 5 years ago, outside of my hobbyist passion, because I quite literally saw a drone get hacked into remotely, hovering one moment and then being moved around the room the next by a keyboard, where the hacker obviously had control of it and was able to hijack its vision and controls. So since then, as a team, we've delved into the security research around drones and counter-drone systems. And hopefully I'll be able to show you a little bit about why drones are actually a huge information security issue, but also what kind of things we're doing in the space to result in less restrictions on the industry and really embed security in from the very beginning. So on the DroneSec side, we do a lot of consulting in this space. We do conducted simulated attacks on things like power stations, as well as helping organizations secure their drone programs from the very beginning, and also prepare for incidents, whether that be their own friendly drones or, say, rogue or malicious drones. So we'll go to the next slide. The DroneSec team is kind of spread across three main offices. So we have Melbourne, Sydney, and Singapore. And one of our key things is that we always try and hire people smarter than ourselves. So we have military drone pilots, we have ex-Air Force members, and of course, some red team operators and hackers in the team, all of which are very passionate about drones and obviously more drones than people in each of the office locations. So our core kind of product is a threat intelligence platform where I'll talk about this later, but we have staff within the FBI, UK National Counterterrorism Police, Interpol, and some of the various major aviation bodies obviously using this on a weekly basis. So for some of these people, we've been interacting with them since about 2016. So we've got a deep history in looking into the security research around drones. Next slide. So roughly about a year ago in the US, there was a cartel operating on the Mexican border, and FBI agents had actually set up a forward base roughly a kilometer from the group that they were observing. And about an hour before they actually got to the place where the cartel was located, no less than 5 small drones made a number of low passes at the agents, creating a big enough distraction that the group actually managed to escape. But not only that, they ended up finding live stream footage from some of these drones to other members and the public of the FBI agents approaching, which was, somewhat embarrassing for the team, given that they didn't know the exact response of what to do at the time. But this isn't just the US where we've seen incidents like this. Next, we've got in Melbourne as well. We had a cartel group or a drug ring putting up a drone just to try to navigate and see if they could see any undercover or clothed officers in the area while they were conducting these sensitive communications. And these are things that we're seeing more and more of, which is kind of the opposite end of the innovation of drones. So if you want to go to the next slide, on the other side of the border of Mexico, for example, Uber used some of the drones to try and advertise to all the busy cars and all that they should stop using vehicles because of the traffic gridlock and instead switch to Uber Pool, which would mean less cars on the road. And I'm not sure if that kind of waiver for using those drones over the vehicles would pass here in Australia, but at Mexico at the time, definitely helped. And we've seen innovations in drones from, lifeguard floatables being thrown to drowning swimmers from drones, to inspecting dangerous power lines, and all these kind of things which really make us want to innovate in this area and increase the possibilities of drones. Next slide. So what does this all really have to do with drone security? Well, for us, our mission is to help people understand the entire bigger picture around it. You can't just focus on drones itself. There is, universal traffic management systems, counter drone systems, and responding to drone incidents. So we're going to go through all those today with a bit of a comprehensive look and give you some resources as well that you can go away with yourself as a small or medium-sized business, as well as if you're in the corporate space, to try and take a hand on some of these yourself. So next slide. So from DroneSec perspective, our mission is really clear. Our motto is to embed security in drone operations to actually increase the innovation of drones, and we want to reduce the restrictions on the industry. Not only are we all hobbyists at heart, but from the commercial perspective, our mission is really to protect the space and carefully manage the risk of negative drones, so that we can increase that positive use. So we look at three key areas, and the first is the protection of friendly drones against attackers or harm. The second is the protection of systems, that support multiple drones, such as UTM or UAM, as well as those counter drone systems. And of course, the last one is protection against drones that are being used for rogue or malicious uses. And that's where the kind of counter drone threat intelligence space comes in. So next slide. So when we're discussing some of these, sometimes you can be looking at different types or sizes of drones and so forth. But what we want to discuss is that all of these are interconnected. When you're talking about hobbyists, where you're taking pictures and flying with the kids, to farming drones where you might want to model and map your crops on a wheat farm, to even your FPV racing drones, where I can pretty much say that anyone who's a fan of this is not going to just be stopping at $600. It's going to be a lot more of that in a hobby. But the key thing is here, there's different laws and regulations that affect them, and different price points, different battery levels, and so forth. But the key is that they're all flying computers in a way, and they all operate on similar communication protocols, which come into some really interesting security precautions, and that's what I'm going to go through. So if you go to the next slide, we're going to go through some of the blueprints as to how drones work, just as an overview for anyone who's not necessarily across it, and see how it works. So in its simplest forms, a drone has a controller, which tells the drone what to do. And the drone then sends things back like the video feed and the battery levels to the controller. And most of the time, this device will have, say, a phone or a tablet that communicates and allows internet connectivity or GPS positioning and things like that. And of course, in some of the commercial drones today, or the off-the-shelf ones, a lot of that information is actually connecting back to the vendor servers. So this information is syncing things like the location of the drone, flight data, serial numbers, and increasingly who the owner of the drone is, and if they're actually allowed to be in that area. So if you go to the next slide, on the, if you want to look at the proprietary side of things, or where I guess some of the drone manufacturers make their money, it's in increasing the range of the drone from the controller while providing really good bandwidth back to the controller, so they can be able to see that vision and so forth. So in a nutshell, with, for example, a DJI drone, they use the onboard transmission system hardware to speak to the drone using something like frequency hopping, and that video is sent back to the hardware using OFDM. So you can apply this on different bandwidths or frequencies, but the key thing here is that you're looking at a communication protocol which is based on similar types of things within computers. So moving to the next slide. So a really interesting kind of take on it, especially from someone like myself in the coming from the security industry, or I guess the cybersecurity industry specifically, was that drones are very much based on something like a network stack or a computer setup, right? Because all of these have IP addresses, which they talk to each other, and all of them have, little Linux systems or Android systems, which are very much based on traditional computer systems. And of course, with having these vendor servers where all this information is going back and being stored and used and analyzed, what we start to see is similar attack vectors to drones or drone networks as we do with computers today. Some of them are exactly the same, and others need a little bit of magic to make the attack vector work towards drones. So what we want to look at is protecting this stack from nefarious activity to the drones we want to protect. Next. So just covering off again, in terms of autonomous drones, this might differ depending on the UAM system or the types of drones, but basically you're taking the controller out of the picture, and you're replacing that by a controller that is embedded into a server or an application that can control multiple drones at once. And this means they can do automated runs, such as modeling or 3D analysis of a field, without the need for a controller. And sometimes this can be automated, so it means that drone can go and do that run without ever needing human input. And of course, that can be sent and received in terms of the commands via a 4G or LTE connection. Sometimes it doesn't have to rely on the traditional Wi-Fi or radio frequency types of communication protocols, depending on who's running it. So we're going to next look at some of the attack vectors. But first of all, we have a poll. So this poll is just to get a bit of an idea as to who is attending. If you want to vote based on, are you in the drone security or counter drone area, working on smart city operations to involve lots of drones around your council or municipality, or are you in some of the other areas like vision, marketing, and so forth? So go ahead and give that poll a bit of a vote. And I guess we'll move on as soon as some people have been able to vote on that.
And I'll let you know as soon as we've got a reasonable audience that's submitted that poll.
Sounds good. And hopefully in the end, these are the kind of results that we're going to be able to share with you, depending on the number of results. So you might be able to get an insight as to what different people are looking into these kind of things and the areas they're in, the sectors and so forth.
Alrighty, so I'll just share those results with the audience there. So there's a result of the poll right there. Alrighty, we'll get going.
Okay, so in terms of attack vectors, I'm going to show you quite a simple, I guess, overview of it. But first, when we look at security for drones, from a DroneSec perspective, this is what we classify as big game hunting. It basically means remote, unauthorized, someone who's not allowed, manipulation of the drone's vision, movement, or information on the drone. And this just comes in to be really clear when you're taking vision of, say, critical infrastructure or national infrastructure systems, things that you don't want competitors to get a hold of, or even transmitting, information that is deemed sensitive by different laws and regulations. So if we go to the next one, I'm going to run through one or two of these for you. But to start you off with an understanding of a simple attack against, say, a Wi-Fi based drone, you could look at it in the following kind of way. So first of all, a hacker starts assessing the air for MAC addresses or a unique string which belongs to a drone. And once he's found that, he knows the drone is in the air, whether it's a known vulnerability or simply abusing the types of passwords that are on that system. If the drone operator hasn't modified that, they're able to connect to that network between the controller and the drone. Now, because most drones are pretty traditional computer systems, you can find a lot of protocols like Telnet, FTP, SSH, different things that allow you to connect to it. And just like a computer system, find your own IP address of the attacker's IP address. And because some of these operate in the same way as computers, you're able to block out the operator and port the vision and the controls to your own system, whether it be a laptop or whether it be some other kind of device, and then manage to fly that drone away, taking it away from the operator's control. Now, for most of the newer drones or advanced drones that are interacting with UTM systems and so forth, software-defined radio takes the cake. So you're going to have radio frequency, and it might not go back to supporting, say, a Wi-Fi based drone. And so then you're looking at other weaknesses, such as protocol manipulation or ways that they can modify a drone in the air. So that's where we're going to run through some of those things. But this is kind of hopefully a simple explanation as to how that might work. So if you want to go to the next slide. There are a lot of traditional vulnerabilities that affect drones, and this talk is not going to be all about the cybersecurity side, but I just want to give you an indication as to how many things could affect them. So I've got some use cases based on things we've observed in the past, and we're just going to run through them one by one because it gives you a good indication as to what happened and how it happened. So if you go to the next slide. This first one was really interesting. Basically, a company had set up an analytics website or server where they were ingesting drone telemetry data to be accessed and then analyzed. They could see the pictures, see where it happened, see how the drone manipulated in terms of the information going through there, battery levels, how the rotors operate and so forth. The problem was because they had set it up in a way that allowed access to the information, we were able to find footage that was being stored from the drones by law enforcement, which they were actually looking at in terms of court cases, as well as vision footage and telemetry data of customers actually going and analyzing critical infrastructure to do this. Now, on top of that, it not only showed you who the drone operator was, but it had photographs of their environments and, sometimes in some cases their homes as well. And this information was quite clearly something that could have been removed if there had been adequate security architecture planning before. So this is something where they set it up, the innovation really kicked off, and they did an incredible job at it. Unfortunately, security just took a back foot on this one. So I'll keep going through them. If we go to the next use case, this was a web application for one of the new UTM systems that was conducting a trial in a city. And one of the user guides for this UTM system basically provided an information documentation guide around how to log in for your very first login. And so in the PDF, it basically said to log in, you simply need to use vendor or your name and vendor123 as the password. Now, at first, you don't know who is a vendor or if they've changed those passwords, so you're kind of in the dark. But unfortunately, on the front of their website, they had a huge who we work with marketing material banner where you were able to simply take the names of those vendors, supply them with that 123 password, and we were able to find one or two vendors who had never actually changed or reset that password and gain access to their Fleet Hub management portal. Now, this sounds like a simple cybersecurity issue, but the problem was it ended up gaining access or control to an organization's entire UTM, flight operations desk. So these are the types of things we look at when you're looking at a root cause for an incident and start to put the steps together as to how it could have been compromised. And that, of course, came back to just simple cybersecurity sanitation, which is why we cover that aspect as well as the kinetic and counter-drone areas in terms of drone security. The next one was obviously something we get asked a lot of the time, and incidents occur far and wide, but an SD card was within a drone that was undertaking critical infrastructure work, and the amount of data that you can obviously find within the telemetry data and the vision is pretty extraordinary. But the difference here is that it really came back to the fact that they had a standard operating procedure for protecting their laptops, their company mobiles, their desktops, their servers. All of the storage for these systems was protected, but they didn't really have an organizational head to manage their drone operations. And so the drone's data and storage was just never looked at. And so we really find there really isn't much guidance on the secure transmission and storage protection of onboard drone data. And so that's something we help organizations with in a really easy to understand way in protecting that, whether you're a small kind of independent sole trader all the way up to the larger firms. So we'll go to the next one. And this case, of course, was quite interesting as well because, they had a drone fireworks show, which are becoming much more popular these days. It's something that the DroneSec team, really likes to encourage because it means, less pollution and environmental damage from fireworks, and of course might be, potentially cheaper in that instance too. The problem is that they didn't really do any hardening or security analysis around their drones. And so during the show, although the drones weren't hovering over people, a number of drones from the swarm fell out of the sky. Now, whether this was due to indirect signals being thrown around and that's what happened, compared to, say, someone on purposely trying to de-authenticate or provide bandwidth that would throw these drones out of the sky, that's a really important step that they should have taken by understanding that the entire threat vector of holding a fireworks show compared to having several hovering laptops in the sky is really different. And so that's something where that SOP needs to account for. And this is something where ISO standards and some of the requirements today look at a number of really key critical elements around safety. But that's where we're trying to push that security aspect to make sure that security is so interlinked with safety that you need to understand those risks before you run something like this. So we can move on. So I'm not sure if how many of you actually know what a bug bounty program is. I'm sure there is a fair amount out there, but basically, as an explainer, organizations were sick and tired of being hacked over the internet by just rogue attackers, right? And the long story short, they basically said that they would promise hackers that they wouldn't lock them up and put them in prison if instead they told them about all the vulnerabilities and the security issues, and they told them only. And then they would also pay them for it. So bug bounties have become quite common these days. There are two key platforms, BugCrowd and HackerOne, which allow anyone to go and find security issues and report them. And so DJI, one of the biggest drone vendors, stood up a bug bounty program. At the start, it was embroiled in a little bit of controversy, but since then they've paid out roughly 300,000 USD to 70 researchers in finding things that would compromise a drone. This obviously includes some of the DroneSec team, and what's interesting is they want to look at things that will, for example, permanently malfunction a device or gain access to the device's storage or user data. They want to look at the applications, the websites, the servers, not just the drones themselves. And so that kind of shows you the scope of security within drones. It's not just sticking to, can you hack into a drone? It's the websites and the servers which support maybe their UTM operations, or maybe other operations that have to do with sensitive individuals purchasing drones and so forth. So they're putting quite a lot of money up to ensure the protection of that. And as far as I know, up to this stage, they're the only drone company to go out and do something like that, but that is increasing. So let's move on to the next one. We have a poll here, and basically it's just for our understanding. This might be something that you have actually thought about and logged. In other areas it may not, but we want to look at, what would you currently classify the sensitivity of data that you capture on your drones if you could fit it into one of these categories. So I'll let that poll run for a minute or two, and then we'll see what the answers are.
I'll just jump in here, and I guess one thing that I would like to note is to make sure that everyone makes the most of having the DroneSec team on the webinar today, and ask any questions that you may have throughout the webinar. Thank you for everyone that submitted that poll. We'll get moving on to the next slide.
Okay. So one of the key things that we start looking at is past the individual uses of drones and more to universal traffic management or urban air management. And so this is where you are controlling drones from a central location, giving multiple drones, route navigation, obstacle avoidance, all that kind of thing, in especially smart cities. So that connected with something like 5G, we're going to see a lot more innovative uses, such as drones being able to do automated runs, one-click operations from the other side of the world. But this is where we start seeing less and less private network drones and more of them that are open. And I guess for anyone who knows Shodan, Shodan.io is a website that catalogs computer systems, CCTV, IoT devices, and if you search up something in there, you'll most likely find it's accessible, and you can actually view what it is. And so it is obviously borderline extending on breaching the laws in terms of what you are accessing. But this is the problem we're seeing, is a lot of these systems that are trying to dive into UTM are putting these drones online mid-flight and allowing that connectivity to be public or accessible. So one of those key things is just making sure that we're preventing these types of systems from being online all the time. So if you go to the next slide, I guess to summarize, if you combine all these cybersecurity aspects together and start looking at how that might affect things, you could have whole swarms of drones that are redirected to airports or areas because of poor security architecture in the design phase. And so that's really one of the key things that we work with organizations in their drone security management program, is making sure that we're thinking of these future issues and applying them. And I can tell you that, when you've got organizations putting a lot of money and effort into these UTM projects and not allowing any amount of risk to enter, these are the types of things they're already trying to think about. So we'll go to the next slide, and there's obviously been a few cyber or electronic attack vectors we've gone through, but drones can be used for malicious purposes as well, which I'm sure many of you are very well aware of. So if you go to the next slide, in Syria during the height of ISIS, a lot of drones were being used there because they were cheap, easily available, and they could perform long-range recon. The guys there basically discovered that commercial software such as DJI drones and so forth allowed great balance of dropping mortars like this one, which is a modified badminton shuttlecock attached to a small 600-gram mortar. And they were able to drop this on things like, in this video, for example, a supply truck filled with explosives. So it wouldn't usually make this big of an explosion. It's carrying munitions. But in close proximity to a person, they cause a lot of damage as well. And the key thing here that we've analyzed is that they're disconnected from the threat. So they're remote, they're not putting themselves in harm's way, similar to, say, if someone shot an RPG at the tank, they would be within range, and return fire would would result. So if you're interested in some of the extent of this in terms of Syria, you should check out some of these reports by memory, where this is an actual drone munition training camp where ISIS went through training people how to attach mortars, modify the extended range, protect against countermeasures, and actually put correspondents through this training course in order to actually arm these weapons. But we actually found it was pretty innovative. They were trying to look at all different ways to overcome the bigger enemy, and so they looked at how they could increase the innovation of drones here. So we're going to take a deeper dive at that. But what does the largest army in the world have to say about drones? Well, in 2017, the US Army authored an entire guide for military forces on reacting to small unmanned systems. It's a really good read, and they even go into things like the patterns of how to run away if you've been spotted by a drone. But one of the key things in that document is that it says both reconnaissance and attack capabilities have matured to the point where the UAS represent a significant threat to the Army. If a UAS is observed over your position, you're already compromised, hence why the live feed is being sent back to the user. Units must attempt to engage and destroy the UAS using any organic means possible. Now, I'm pretty sure they don't mean, if you go to the next slide, this type of organic, but what they did mean was indicated in a talk given by General David Perkins of the US Army. And he actually testified that because of one of the drones that had spotted them, they couldn't take it down with regular fire. They ended up having to use a Patriot missile to try and bring this small drone down. And he goes on to say that the economic trade-off between a $600 Amazon drone and a $4 million missile was really bad, especially when they could send a swarm and use up all those Patriot missiles. So they take it pretty seriously. And if you look in the context of drones not having to be laden with explosives, as the British Met Police found out for a harrowing 3 days, then drones can simply cause a lot of financial disruption without even having a payload. And a good friend of mine, David Hambling, once called drones giant mechanical geese from hell, simply because the drone is just spotted and it causes the grounding of flights. And if you go to the next slide, an interesting dilemma we found was that protesters caught on to this idea that not only can a drone ground flights, but a drone sighting can ground flights, and even an alleged drone sighting can ground flights. So to that extent, they simply threatened to call in an alleged drone sighting in order to shut down an airport, and that was enough to trigger the grounding of flights. And so this gives their protest a little bit more objective. So we're already dealing with these types of things where the laws and regulations are in an interesting place. Drones are hard and they have batteries inside of them, and they explode and impact in a different way to, say, birds in some cases, and so they do provide more of a security risk than your usual ducks or geese in the air. So if you go to the next slide, I want to introduce you to one of the core pillars of drone security, and that is, the counter drone industry, which I'm sure everybody has heard about more and more. Year on year, we see hundreds more organizations starting up in the counter drone field. From the DroneSec perspective, we are agnostic and industry independent, so we don't actually conduct or do counter drone systems. We don't build them ourselves, but I'll take you through some of them and why I think different organizations do need to have them, and why some may not necessarily require. But one of the things we do is assess the counter drone journey. So we believe that drones or companies looking to counter drones are in 3 different quadrants. The first is the before phase, where they think they might need a counter drone system to try and bring down drones. And they're trying to figure out how much it might cost. They're going through the different demos and they're collecting statistics. They're trying to think of what kind of range and environment they need to consider. And then you have the during phase, where maybe they've pulled the trigger on a counter drone system and they're trying to do testing around it. They're trying to develop all their SOPs themselves. They're trying to figure out who, is it our IT guys or our security department or our physical security department that has the responsibilities of running a counter drone system. And of course, for the ones that have got them and use them, they need to look at, continually trying to run those simulations and cater for those counter drone systems. So in some cases, that before phase may not be relevant for them. Depending on the laws, they might not even be allowed a counter drone system in their area, but they also might not really have a problem. And that's where the evidence and statistics comes in. So if you go to the next slide, one of the key things that we do at DroneSec is threat intelligence, where we collect all kinds of events from hundreds of different sources, and we try to categorize them by location, what type of drone was seen. We try and determine the sector they were in and put them through our methodology to determine what kind of incidents we are seeing and where they're occurring. And this helps provide the statistics and the evidence around whether they actually need something like a counter drone system. But carefully, one thing that we try to do is assess patterns. So is there multiple instances of a drone incident that has occurred somewhere that can link these drones back to an individual or a group? Are they using the same system over and over again? And so these are the pattern analysis that we do. And one of the best examples for this is Singapore's reaction to coronavirus. And if you want to go to the next slide, the DroneSec team were actually in Singapore during when COVID-19 was being taken a lot more seriously by Singapore at that time than other countries. It was in its early days. We were there for the air show. And Singapore took this incredible effort to try and track down a COVID patient's journey, right? So who they met, what they touched, where they went. And they took this information and they created points of interest to try and predict who might be next infected and then prevent further people from being infected. And so if you go to next, we have in a similar fashion the same type of thing that we do with drones. We take all the data from eyewitnesses, we take law enforcement reports, we have counter drone systems that are detecting drones and feeding that information in, and even things like underground forums or videos that might link together evidence and help us predict and then try and prevent future rogue drone operations. You can go to the next one. So next again, maybe. So most customers use this to try and actually apprehend rogue drone users, because based on the information you have, you might be able to put together a story that better fits law enforcement in the case of something really bad happening with a rogue drone. And this is how we consistently try to prevent restrictions on the drone industry by enforcing good use of drones and trying to, seek out those small, frustrating drone incidents which seem to keep the aviation authorities on their toes and trying to put more restrictions on the industry. Next slide. So in terms of once we've gotten through all that information and you do have a counter drone system or you're looking to actually take down a drone in the air, Jacob Tavis has a brilliant paper. You should read it, called Drone Defense is Still Illegal. And yes, in most countries other than law enforcement, most of these methods are illegal to use in terms of taking down rogue drones. And he puts it in a very simple way. It's jam, fry, brick, spoof, hack, grab. And the reason why there are so many different counter drone systems is because there's very different laws from country to country, and the fact that drones are made up of electronic components, aeronautics, and computers. So there's different attack vectors for different types of drones, and that's why you may see some overlap in the different countermeasures taken. So if you go to the next slide, one of the most simplest ones are geofences. We don't believe they give a very comprehensive prevention to handling misuse of drones. You can remove these by modding. It's usually just some database of GPS coordinates installed in the drone, and it tries to prevent drones flying into that area. But you're going to need a mainstream drone manufacturer who actually has the capability to do this, and it really can be bypassed in a number of ways. So at DroneSec, we don't really believe in geofences as a good option against countering drones. If you go to the next one, you have jamming methods. So this can be jamming the radio frequency connection between the drone, but also jamming the GPS system, which is very illegal in most countries. And the thing here, you may have seen some of these before. If you go next, we have one of the EMP jammers, and you may have seen some of the more portable ones, such as the Drone Shield drone gun. If you go next again. next. And so you'll see that, the positives of these is that they can be portable, but some of the negatives are that, they need to make sure they're on the frequencies that they know other drones are coming at them. And also, if you just simply jam it out of the sky without a finesse mitigation style technique, that drone will probably fall down into the ground or crash. So there are positive and negatives to those different methods. So if you go next, there's also spoofing or hacking and otherwise known as bricking. And this is where the cybersecurity style comes into play. And this is where they do something called protocol manipulation. They're looking for weaknesses within the drone and the communications, and they try to make it land more guided or safely. But again, some of the limitations to this is that if you are not law enforcement and that drone does not belong to you, there's legal complications such as interrupting and operating the radio communications service. You infringe on computer cybercrime acts since it is a laptop in the way or a computer in the sky. And we've seen examples of this through, for example, Department 13's MESMA system. You can go next, and that's where they cover this angle or industry in the protocol manipulation side. So we'll move on to the next one, which is the kinetic measures, which are the good old mom and pop sitting on Facebook telling people to shoot it out of the sky with something like a shotgun. So we've got a number of examples here. The one is, for example, if you go next, nets. We've got the Fortum Technologies Drone Hunter here, which grabs drones with nets. If you go next, we have your handy old shotgun, which probably a little bit more available in the US, but also the destruction of a drone with a shotgun probably removes a lot of that forensic evidence. And of course, you have a couple of years ago, the Netherlands police try to use eagles to take down drones because of their thick talons. But obviously you're facing an issue when there's a swarm of drones and you've only got one or two eagles. So there's positive and negatives around the different kinetic methods, but most likely you're going to come into issues with the range of a kinetic method, but also trying to get any kind of forensic or ownership data off the drone or the unmanned system if it's been partially destroyed in doing that. So including, the fact that if you take a drone out with kinetic measures over an arena, we had the one of the big arena shows here in Melbourne not too long ago, and a number of drones hovering around Adele as she sang. And if you were to take one of those out, they would likely fall on someone. So that creates a new issue. So you can go next. So at the moment, we're in a really interesting place, and to understand drone security, wholly, you really need to look at the root cause, and some of these are around the laws and regulations, the policies that we have in this area. In the US, you have the FAA and the FCC. Over here, we have CASA, we have the ACMA as well, and in Singapore, we deal with CAS and IMDA, and these are between aviation bodies and communication or signal bodies who govern those areas. And so it makes it quite interesting in terms of protecting good places or environments we want to protect against rogue drones, but also not restricting all the innovation we want to see in deliveries and using them to fight the COVID-19 pandemic and things like that. So this is a different area because we are combining all those computers with aeronautics and physical kinetics as well. So you can go to the next one. So we've got another poll here, and this one is just a bit of a personal interest to me as well. Really interested in seeing how this one will go. But do you think that counter drone systems will actually protect against restrictions on the industry, or whether it will actually help enforce restrictions on something like this? So we've got some answers there, that it will prevent, won't prevent, might help. And obviously that question 3 and 4 are the same one, so that one is the same one if you choose that. And of course the last one is in terms of not really knowing much about counter unmanned aerial systems.
Again, another reminder to everyone, please keep submitting your questions and queries and we'll get to them towards the back end of the webinar today. So thank you very much. All right, we'll close that poll off.
All right. So one of the key things that we try and cover as well is the concept of drone forensics, or in layman terms, what happens to a good or a bad drone if it's involved in an incident. So this includes counter drone systems where they're bringing down a malicious drone and you find the culprit and detain the drone, but also if, for example, one of your drones came down. So the good thing is that you're in luck. If you go to the next slide, drones or a lot of these commercial drones these days are containing a lot of information. They're very similar to the whole S3 buckets pandemic as seen on the internet, where you have lots of information available for the public that should have never been made public. But it does help in our job as forensic responders. So if you go to the next slide, basically normal forensics applies here. You want to figure out the root cause analysis. So if you had a good drone that came down into a field, you basically want to answer the questions of what happened. Did it actually get attacked in a way? Was it just hit? Did it just hit a bird? You can very easily with analytics programs these days find out if it was a maintenance fault or if a battery died or something like that. But those are the questions you want to ask. And if it is a bad drone, you're specifically looking at things like the who, what, where, and how. Who was behind it, where were they located, how did they take off, how did they get through, and that's where we specifically assess some of these key things like the storage on board the drone, the controller. There's information that's been sent to external places as well, and all of that is well and good until you start looking at custom-made drones or racing drones and things like that, where you may not have access to that data because it's simply not being logged. And so if you go to the next slide, one of the key organizations, VTO Labs, set up some drones in a field, around 79 of them, and they flew them all around in the exact same way. And then they did a chip off of making all those data sets available by allowing you to assess what a drone should look like, and so how you can compare that to the drone you're assessing. So if you go next 2 times, there's some pictures there. But basically, this means that they made this available as the NIST drone dataset. You can go next, and you were able to get this online via their website for quite some time. Recently, they've made that private, so if you do want to get a hold of those, just speak to us and we'll be able to help you out there. But that is something that we look at in the forensic space. Go next again. And next. So the key thing of why they created this was simply because they didn't want to practice on evidence. If a drone came down in their area, their prison or their airspace, they didn't want to start doing their very first analysis on a drone where that evidence might be needed in court. And so it's really important that if you are in an organization that is responding to drone threats, you have a standard operating procedure that assesses this. So if you go next, maybe 2 times, you'll see there's some images that appear on the VTO Labs breakdowns where it shows you exactly what to expect on the drone, what kind of file system you'll be dealing with, and allows you to prepare for that so that if something happens, you've got someone familiar with the process and you can extract that evidence for court or for law enforcement, depending on who's handling it. So you can go next. So in terms of the future of security operations, this is quite literally what we are focused on. We are forward thinking in terms of what is coming up next that we need to handle. And if you go next, we're basically, for our perspective, the key thing here is people coming in from different industries to help out in this drone security space, or realizing the issues and risks that we need to remediate before they become too much. So we're already seeing things like chief drone officer positions posted up. DroneSec was the very first company in the world to hire a drone security consultant, which is dedicated to threat intelligence and security operations of drones. And we just expect more of that to increase as hopefully more organizations take this in-house, not really requiring that consulting side of things, but also for those who want to get involved and help make this industry more secure, so we have less restrictions. And if you go next, one of the key things we do at DroneSec is create really simple, easy to understand frameworks for organizations looking to secure their drones, assess counter drone systems, and also prevent incidents from occurring to their drones. So one of the ways we're doing this, we're creating the or co-collaborating with URSA, a drone forensic firm as well, on the MITRE ATT&CK framework for unmanned systems. That's something where we're focusing on allowing you to very easily see the steps to attack a type of drone or a UTM system, and then put mitigations in place to protect it. And the whole key thing here is that it will be really easy to understand and use. We're also soon to be publishing, and we haven't, gotten to the point of putting this out just yet, is a rating system for self-assessment of counter-drone systems. So if you're a government department, or if you're a corrections facility and you're looking at protecting yourself and you're in that counter-drone journey, what are the steps you need to take, the checkpoints you need to take to assess and ensure that you can give the counter-drone vendor that is trying to, sell you their product a bronze or a silver or a gold rating and so forth. So we help you out with that. And of course, with our threat intelligence, that's something where on a weekly basis, we take all those records and sources and put that together to actually assess what the risk is there. So we have a another poll coming up. I think this might be the last one here. But it's simply more from your perspective. If you are looking or need to consider something like security, whether it's from a legal perspective or from you just wanting to innovate without the breaks of restrictions, how would you best like that delivered to you?
Fantastic. And as we come towards the back end of this webinar today, just again, one last reminder, any questions or queries, please submit them in the tab on the right-hand side, and Mike and myself will get to them at the back end of the webinar. Fantastic. Thank you.
All right. So, when we come to a close, I guess, and there might actually be a summary slide before this one, I think, Paris. Might just hit back and see. Yeah. So one of the key things is that, when you're looking at drone security from a holistic point of view, there are so many components involved, from the computer side to the counter UAS side. Think of all the laws and regulations in there as well. And we try to cover this off with the threat intelligence too. So, the three quadrants of electronic components, kinetic, and, obviously being in close proximity as well as our airspace, means we really need to try and research this area and continue to contribute in a collaborative environment. So I've got some resources in the next slide that might help, that I've referenced, some of the papers and images, and some of the people that are involved in the security aspect of drones, just from a public perspective. And obviously you can also sign up to our DroneSec Notify platform with the below link. And something important just to say on that one is that in the coming weeks, we're going to be onboarding 1 or 2 customers to a beta program where they can provide feedback. So we really are looking for organizations that have drones, are part of our project, our platform, and are able to provide some feedback in a bit of a beta phase. So that'll come up soon, and you'll be able to hop on a pretty good discount before it launches. So that's the link there. Otherwise, you can go to the next slide. I'm reachable at mike@dronesec.com, or we obviously can be reached through info@dronesec.com, and we are on through LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. But again, just a big thank you to Sphere Drones for hosting us and allowing us to talk to you. It is comprehensive, thorough. There's a lot of different aspects to it, so more than happy to chat about any type of security issues or concerns you might have for your drones, your UTM systems, or your counter drone area.
Thanks, Mike. Really appreciate you spending your time with us today. So we've got a couple of questions. And the first question that came through earlier today was, is there a specific standard, regulatory or best practice that can be followed for the drone security or just the UAV industry in general?
Yeah, so that's a really good point. Something that we are trying to create ourselves at this point, because there is very little standards that are industry recognized in terms of ISOs, or required or released from some of the aviation bodies. And I know some of them are working on it, but at this point in time, while there are individual reports put out by different vendors in terms of securing small isolated pieces of the problem. There is no set guide. And so one thing that we've been committed to since about halfway through last year was creating standards that are very similar to, if you're in the computer or security side of things, OWASP or NIST, or the ASD Essential 8. So really easy to understand and go by, that you can use as a sole trader or as a commercial perspective. So I will put out some more resources if you like, based on that, if you have a specific area you'd like. But otherwise, just watch the space, and we'll be releasing some of those in the near future.
Yeah, fantastic. And maybe we can share some of these resources through our email that will go out on the back end of this webinar today, for sure. Another question here that we've received: have companies begun to establish these standardized frameworks? Given that the number of drone manufacturers is continually rising, I assume many of these are using their own in-house security considerations in their firmware. Is there anything you can comment on that?
Yeah, exactly. So we're seeing some pretty big firms, especially the I guess you could say the big military firms are sometimes getting into the UAV or the UTM space, and they do have in-house capabilities where they're trying to secure that from a vendor perspective. So, before going for a big tender or trying to get that project set in stone, they need to be able to show the government and the aviation authorities that they're doing their due diligence. Those aren't really published, and they're not something that are being made available. So from an agnostic perspective, that is something we're pushing really hard to get out to everyone in a small amount of time, and something we have consultants dedicated to doing. But yeah, you're completely right in the fact that it's in-house at the moment, and not too much is just industry based. I will say, however, there is a drone group based off. I'll remember the name. Actually, I'll put it in the resources. But David Kovar from Ursa, a drone forensic company in the US. I know I've mentioned him once in this talk. He is part of a drone advisory group that does consider some of these security topics. So that's something that I'll put in the link. The name's just escaping me at this time.
Yeah, fantastic. And another question here. So what are some examples of organic means of taking down a drone?
So organic, I guess, if you're referring to the slide of the US military, was using any or anything that you can find available to you at the time. That's how I understood that, and hence why they opted to use a Patriot missile, which is definitely not made to take down a small commercial off-the-shelf drone. So my understanding was, from their perspective, if you could throw a rocket at or or shoot a Patriot missile, that was the go with trying to take it down. And that was more around the risk that the drone had already seen their position, live streamed that back to the enemy, and it was just going to cause further harm and damage to them.
Fantastic. And I'll probably go on to one last question here. From a forensic point of view, is there a standardized procedure on how to conduct first response and afterwards forensic analysis?
Absolutely. One of the most famous is the Incident Responders Guide to Drone Investigations, released by Interpol, and that is a brilliant resource that they published from some of their working groups, and you can find that on I believe Interpol has actually released it themselves, but if not, we'll be able to get you in contact with one of the heads that runs the drone security programs there, Christopher Church, and he releases that information. So that is a worldwide, many different drone bodies and forensic companies came through together to create that SOP. And it means that you can use that in-house, or you can reference it to create your own customized SOP for forensics and incident response. So it really does cover everything head to toe, and having so many eyes over it, it really is quite a quality document.
Well, thank you very much, Mike, for your time today. It's definitely been a very insightful webinar, and I hope the audience have enjoyed it. Thank you very much, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to remind everyone, over the next few weeks, we've got a couple of great webinars coming up. So this Thursday, we've got one on multispectral data and analysis with the team at Microsense over in the US. Next Tuesday, I'll be presenting drone solutions preventing the virus outbreak, COVID-19. And then next Thursday, we've got a team member from the Surf Lifesaving New South Wales drone program talking about the ins and outs of their program, the learnings and the fun times that they've had. So yeah, I'd like to thank everyone and Mike and the rest of the team for joining us today. And if there's any feedback or anything you'd like to hear in the future, please feel free to email us or send us some feedback. That would be fantastic. So again, stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you the next time we're chatting. Thanks, Mike, again.
Pleasure. See you, everyone.